Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Ventura Center for Spiritual Living. I'm Reverend Bonnie Rose, and it is great to see you here today. Let's start our celebration service by standing up, getting into the spirit of the season, and singing together our congregational song, Angels We Have Heard on High, found on the far left side of your program, and here we go. Angels we have heard on high. Thank you, Bernie. So let us continue to breathe into that spaciousness that Bernie created with her words, into the realization of love in everything, the power and the presence of the best love that we could possibly imagine, beyond our imagination, that has brought us here today to be together, to lift ourselves and to lift the world. And let us do that right now by becoming still and listening to the words of our sacred reading.
The Stable by Leslie Leland Fields. Let the stable still astonish. Straw dirt floor, dull eyes, dirty flanks of donkeys, oxen. No bed to carry that pain. And then the child, rag-wrapped, laid to cry in a trough. Who would have chosen this? Who would have said, yes, let the God of all the heavens and earth be born here, in this place? Who but the same God who stands in the darker, fouler rooms of our hearts and says, yes, let the God of all the heavens and the earth be born here, in this place.
And so let us breathe into our hearts, into this place where the God of heaven and earth resides. The God of heaven on earth resides. And as we breathe into this knowing, into this depth, into this power, we remember who we are, and we sing together, I am remembering. Remembering not only for ourselves, but for all beings everywhere. We send this message of remembrance around the world, to heal, to uplift, to love. And let us begin. In the stillness, we rest in this presence as this presence. And we bring this awareness to our open-eyed state as we breathe in deeply. And then exhale, gently opening our eyes in love with what is, as it is. And so it is.
I am a snowflake falling from the sky, out where the wind blows. Surely I can't fly. I am one of a kind. Little snowflake. Everyone looks different from our head down to our feet. Ears, eyes, nose, and hair, everyone unique. And I know that you have a smile wide as the sky. And when you smile that special way, we all feel the same inside. I am a snowflake falling from the sky. Out where the wind blows, surely I can fly. I am one of a kind, little snowflake. Smiling faces in the sun, circus fair has just begun. Laughter in the eyes of everyone. When you're in a sunny way, you know it's a special day. Now we're on our way to have some fun. I am a snowflake falling from the sky. Out where the wind blows, surely I can fly. I am one of a kind, little snowflake. I am one of a kind, little snowflake. Yeah. And true love is blind, little snowflake. And true love is blind, little snowflake.
So thank you, Gia, and thank you, wonderful band. I want to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for today. It's Michael Eselun. Let's just applaud that name because we love Michael Eselun, right? Right? Oh. Michael has spoken for us many times before, and it's always wonderful. He is a certified chaplain, and he serves as the chaplain for the Simsman UCLA Center for Integrative Oncology. He's worked extensively in oncology, hospice, palliative care, and with acute psychiatric patients. He's been invited many times to speak to students, doctors, nurses, social workers, and to dozens of faith communities across the country about his work as a chaplain. He recently gave the keynote at the National Conference for Women Living with Metastatic Breast Cancer in Philadelphia, and was the keynote speaker at the Promising Practices for Mental Health and Aging Conference at the California Endowment. Michael is also the co-founder and chair of a nonprofit volunteer anti-homophobia speakers bureau called GLIDE, Gays and Lesbians Initiating Dialogue for Equality. Over the last 20 plus years, Michael and his fellow speakers have spoken to an audience of over 150,000 students, teachers, and other various groups and agencies in the LA area about homophobia. He has a TED Talk available online via YouTube called It's Magic, and you can find out more about him at www.michaeleselun.com. If you want to learn how to spell that, his name is in the program. He'll have CDs available for purchase after the service downstairs in the Unique Boutique, and they include several of his talks, and he's got a volume 1 and a volume 2. I already have volume 1, and I have to tell you, it's wonderful. It was the best commute I ever had from LA to Ventura, listening to volume 1 of Michael's talks. It's wonderful. I can't wait to get my hands on volume 2. I know you'll want to visit him after the service and do the same. So let's give some Ventura love to our guest speaker, our great guest speaker, Michael Eselun.
Well, that is very nice indeed. Thank you. A few years ago, I was speaking to another congregation, a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and I was greeting folks after the service, and this man approached me and was sharing with me how he had come to align himself with Unitarian Universalism. However, he continues to struggle with one of its core principles, affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I was a little shocked by that, because to me that had always been a no-brainer. I mean, like, duh, dude, of course that's true. like world peace is a good idea. But the more I thought about it, I thought I've glossed over that one a little too easily myself. In his view, there were people who had done such horrible things, or maybe people who hadn't done horrible things, but they just weren't good, kind people, and that didn't speak to any particular inherent worth or dignity. So I tried to draw a distinction for him then and there between the concept of worth and dignity and good and evil, awkward at best in such a setting, but the thing is, those two notions do dance very closely together. And all of this isn't so terribly removed from more Christian notions about God's grace as something that's freely given and can't be earned. I wonder if what really hung him up was that word inherent, that somehow worth and dignity had to be proven or earned. As much as I'd like to believe that's a core concept for me, the fact is I've judged myself very harshly throughout my life based on what I did or didn't do. And very often, though I'm loath to admit it, based on how much money I made, or more likely didn't make. Though I'd like to think I know better. And of course, a big part of me does know better, but the fact remains there have been moments in my life when in my own mind, my very right to exist, to take up space on the planet, depended on it, my ability to make money. Yeah, I'm really down with that inherent worth and dignity thing. And look at how much cultural reinforcement there is for that value system out there that would say you are what you do. You meet somebody for the first time, and what's the second or third question you're going to ask them? So what do you do? With some professions, we even attach a title to our very names. Our very identities inextricably linked with what we do. Doctor or reverend. A number of years ago, I was devastated to have been laid off from my job at the time as the palliative care chaplain at the Santa Monica UCLA hospital. I was struggling with a lot at the time, but not the least of which was how to respond to very well-meaning loved ones and friends who seemed to incessantly ask, so what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? My therapist at the time suggested responding, I'm engaged in a spiritual practice of letting go. Now, as loopy as that might sound, I find there's a profound truth there. My job would be, in a way, become to let go. Are we really no more than our deeds? Look at how we construct an obituary. A resume, basically, to describe a person's whole being and their essence. Wife, mother, teacher, nurse. Even without the limitations of a few lines in an obituary, how would you describe your personal essence? Would it still be a list of some kind, what I loved, what I lost, my victories, my challenges? Would it depend on the day you were asked? Is our identity even really fixed? Or in the end, does it really come down to you are what you did in life? And where's the inherent worth and dignity in that? As an oncology chaplain, I walk beside countless patients who watch their very identities dissolve right before their eyes when the thing that they did is no longer available to them. Do they cease to exist in that moment? Has their worth and dignity been lost, misplaced, suspended for a time? Carla, a young mother, 2 little girls, absolutely devoted to those daughters of hers. Her whole life, her world revolved around those girls and their activities. When breast cancer robbed her of the ability to attend the soccer games and the birthday parties, she felt a crushing sense of defeat and failure as a mother. Does she cease to be the mom in that moment? Is she no longer a good parent? We looked at how she was still being the mom, perhaps teaching the ultimate lessons any of us will ever really have to learn: how to love, how to face crisis and loss, and how to let go. Luther was this lovely older African-American gentleman, a lifelong Pentecostal preacher and pastor, facing the end of his days from pancreatic cancer. When the social worker made that referral to me and gave me that little snapshot of Luther, I felt an instant dread and panic. How on earth is somebody like me going to make a connection with somebody like him? It took a little time, I must admit. It took some time for Luther's humanity to peek out from behind all of his platitudes and certainty. Chaplain Michael, do you want to know what the hardest thing of all is about this? It's to realize that my congregation is going to go on without me, and they're going to be just fine. I always saw them as my flock, and I was their shepherd. I was indispensable, but I'm nobody's minister anymore. I told him he was still being a minister, perhaps from a different kind of pulpit, but showing me how to face fear, how to face the inevitability of loss with humility and with grace. For some, they see their whole life as kind of proof that there's an absence of worth and dignity. You might spend their whole life struggling against that, caught in the trap. Miguel was this elegant Spanish gentleman in his 60s, esophageal cancer. He'd grown up in a highly accomplished patrician Spanish family and was highly accomplished himself from where I stood anyway. He was a professor of Middle Eastern cultures and studies. He spoke several languages fluently. He'd written several books. But none of it was enough. Michael, when I die, there should be only 2 words on my tombstone, he said. Mediocrity and will. Why would you say such a thing, I asked. Because if I've achieved anything at all in my life, as mediocre as it's been, it's only because of sheer will. When I was a little boy, I used to prick myself with a pin all over until I drew blood just to stay awake, stay up later so I could study harder. Where does that kind of self-loathing come from, that lack of capacity to recognize one's own value just for being oneself? Are we really no more than our deeds, the best or the worst of them? Look at Lance Armstrong. What to make of all of that? He did indeed inspire untold thousands with his story. His victory over his cancer, his racing victories. He wrote a book. He created a foundation. I met dozens of patients years ago so inspired by Lance. You got to live strong. And then all this news of cheating and doping, and he lost the very platform he had from which to inspire. So does that negate and nullify all the inspiration he did? It'll be interesting to see, I think, as time goes on, if Lance has the opportunity to offer a whole other kind of inspiration of just what it means to be a human being in darkness and in light. Many years ago, I worked on the liver transplant unit, and I co-facilitated a weekly support group for folks waiting for livers. And there I met Hugo, who was this dapper, charming as hell Latino gentleman in his 50s, always sporting a snappy hat, featuring a little bling, with these tattoos peeking out from his cuff and collar that hinted at a, shall we say, more rambunctious youth in East LA, where he'd grown up. Hugo was waiting for his second liver. His first liver transplant had failed. As he grew sicker, he needed to be hospitalized, deteriorating by the day. I went to see him one afternoon, and he told me with some urgency, I need to make a confession to a Catholic priest. I told him I'd page Father Tom right away, our staff priest, and he said, no, that won't do. This sin is so terrible, I can only confess it to the parish priest at the church in East LA where I grew up. I sat and I listened to this scared, broken man. He's desperate to unburden his conscience, and I felt the most tender affection and compassion for him. I wanted to make this happen. When I left work that afternoon, when I got in the car, turned on the car radio, and I heard a news story about some drunk driver in downtown LA who had just wiped out maybe a dozen people. My instant gut response was, kill the bastard. Now, I don't know what Hugo had done, but I imagine it was something pretty terrible. But in that sacred moment at the bedside, it didn't matter. There was compassion, there was grace, there was definitely worth and dignity. A couple hours later in the car, I had no such capacity in that moment to recognize those qualities in that drunk driver. So it makes me wonder what role forgiveness plays in our capacity to affirm worth and dignity. On one hand, it would seem an essential piece of the equation. But I find forgiveness to be a complex, prickly topic. I'm not entirely sure what it is in all of its permutations. Margaret has survived years of physical assault and abuse by her husband, and she is now dying of ovarian cancer. She's rooted in her Christian faith. Michael, I know God won't forgive me unless I can forgive others, but I just can't forgive my husband, no matter how hard I try. Do you think I'm condemned? Doris, also rooted in her Christian faith, survived years of sexual assault and molestation at the hands of her father. And yet, in her view, Michael, God demands that I forgive my father to the degree that I harbor any resentment or anger toward him at all. It's as grave a sin as his molestation of me. I hear that and I think, what a debilitating burden. What a barrier to experiencing grace for herself. A grace that will be large enough and merciful enough to have room for her anger. I suspect that for many of us, our capacity to affirm worth and dignity might not be as inherent as we might like to think. That it might very much be tied to ideas about proving and earning. Corinne has survived 10 years with metastatic breast cancer, and yet she confesses to me that she feels guilty for being alive, when so many women she's met along the way have long since died. So she runs herself ragged doing volunteer work to the detriment of her own well-being, chasing after this elusive worth and dignity. In a similar sort of way, Wilma has devoted much of her life to serving others, the destitute and homeless mostly, and all that inspired out of her Christian faith. But now she's got advanced ovarian cancer and she needs help. She needs help from her family, she needs help from her husband, she needs help from her church community. But what grieves Wilma, do you suppose? I can't pay anyone back. I can't do anything for anyone, and I'll never be able to. It's impossible for Wilma to imagine that people might be showing up for her just because they love her, not because of anything she's done or can do. Even more inconceivable to Wilma was the idea that maybe just being Wilma is payback enough. A few years ago, I read the most profoundly moving story in the New York Times about a program at the California Men's Colony, a maximum security prison up near San Luis Obispo. The program attempts to address this overwhelming and ever-growing problem of dementia among an aging prisoner population. How to care for these men and how to pay for it, something we don't think about, do we? So the prison, as a cost-saving strategy, is recruiting younger inmates to be the aides and caregivers for the older inmates. Gold coats, they're called, because of the yellow jackets they wear, to stand out among the standard issue blue coveralls. The gold coats tend to all the most personal needs of the older inmates. They wake them, bathe them, feed them, dress them. They make sure other prisoners don't steal their food. They clean up after the inevitable bodily mishaps. Now, both men on either side of this relationship have often committed the most horrific crimes imaginable. If they had any claim on inherent worth and dignity, it would seem they have forfeited it long ago. And for the gold coat, there's no hope of brownie points here. There's no possibility of early parole, commuted sentence, only the possibility of the experience of compassion for choosing to engage in this dance of the condemned. This image moves me beyond words. Two condemned souls, and one chooses to put on the gold coat for no other reason than, as one of them put it, allowing me to feel human. Can that gold coat be a pathway for us to see beyond our own judgment of others, of ourselves? Can it open a window to discovering what might have been inherent all along? One thing I love about this image is that the crime hasn't been erased or forgiven, whatever that means. The blue jumpsuit doesn't come off. We just put the gold coat on over it and do the kind thing anyway. Speaking for myself and for many of the folks I've been privileged to walk beside over the years, I think a fair number of us have done some time in those blue coveralls of the condemned, metaphorically speaking, condemned by our own internal judges. Some of us maybe for a lifetime. Even if those blue coveralls never come off, we always have the opportunity and the invitation to put on the gold coat and tend to that which is broken and weak and scared and fragile and guilty as hell with kindness. Tend to it within ourselves, tend to it within each other. I was raised a Catholic, and so I was taught there's a hierarchy of sin, that some sins are worse than others. Committing murder is worse than telling a lie. Protestants tend to view that a little differently. Sin is just sin. Speaking for myself, I don't think we have to have committed these horrific crimes. The size of the sin doesn't seem to matter a bit to my internal judge. He won't be convinced and he won't be silenced. I don't think we have to have committed those horrific crimes of the condemned in order to condemn ourselves and imprison ourselves with judgment. I mentioned earlier that I have struggled at times in my life with the correlation between money and worth and dignity. As a chaplain, I don't make enough money to support myself. My husband, Scott, up until now, has generously subsidized my life and my pursuits. That particular circumstance has been far more challenging to accept and embrace than I care to admit. Not to Scott at all, mind you, it's all me. As much as I'd like to think otherwise, I suppose I'm not impervious to these ideas and values that would say a man's worth and his value, his success, is tied to how much money he makes. So when I make a mistake, one that costs money to remedy, you cannot imagine the internal condemnation. Last year, in the span of a month, I got not one, not two, but 3 parking tickets. $56 a pop for forgetting to hang the permit placard parking in front of my own damn house. I do not exaggerate to say at the time it felt like I don't deserve to live. I was mortified, humiliated to have to tell Scott, and it didn't matter one bit that his response would be, "So you made a mistake," or 3. "You're human." I was embarrassed by the amount of suffering I was causing myself. But the fact is, a core wound had been touched. The wound of inherent worthlessness. Not so different from Miguel, who used to prick himself with a pin just to stay awake. So committing the sin of carelessness when I'm being financially supported, unforgivable. Maybe I'm a Protestant after all. But as I've judged myself, so it is that I've judged others. Geez, the hours in therapy dissecting the sins of the father, for instance. But just as we might hold ourselves and each other hostage for committing the smallest of sins, so it is that the smallest of deeds, as the gold coat might suggest, might open up a whole pathway to offering ourselves and each other redemption. Perhaps in the craziest irony of all, what we do might just open a window to what was inherent all along. About 5 years ago, Janet died, an old friend of the family, my mom's best friend. We all gathered in Long Beach, where I was born and raised, for her memorial service. I'd grown up with her kids, and I hadn't seen them in over 40 years. But I could still see traces of the children they were dance across their faces and their smiles. After the service, pulled into the undertow of nostalgia, we took my mom on a driving tour all over Long Beach to revisit all these landmarks from our lives, both of our lives as kids and her life as a young teenage Midwest transplant during World War II. Of course, many of the landmarks are long gone, but quite a few remain. It does leave me wondering, though, why it gives us such comfort to find the detritus of our lives exactly where we left it. The last spot, the last stop on our tour would be the house I grew up in, the house my parents built, the house that's still the setting for so many nighttime dreams, the house we left in 1969 after my parents' divorce. My mom, if you can imagine, a young bride of 20 and mother, got to help design her dream house with my dad's best boyhood friend who had just graduated from USC Architecture School. It was a mid-century modern gem. Of course, like so many of the landmarks, the house has now been obliterated with bad additions and remodels, but quite a few remnants remain. I screwed up the courage to go up to the front door, now encased in a grotesque wrought iron security gate. And I knocked. And I heard the inner door open, but I couldn't see through the mesh, as if it were a confessional. I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I grew up in this house, and my parents built this house. And my mom's 82 years old, and she's out in the car right now, and she lives 200 miles away, and it'd mean the world to her and to us if we could come in and look around just for a minute. Sure, a kid, he said flatly, 21 or 22, a Cambodian. From the way it sounded, it didn't sound like it was his family's house. Maybe he's a boarder or extended family. In any event, he's home alone, and so he let us in. I gulped for air as I watched my mom walk up the steps to her own house. In an instant, I could see her as she once was, glamorous, earrings, lipstick, high heels clicking on the flagstone as she came home from PTA. And as she is today. With tears in her eyes, she gingerly stepped toward the front door with this kind of reverence, as if she's approaching the altar, ready to receive Holy Communion. Once inside, it was as if we were floating in a zero-gravity chamber with no anchor in time or space. And we made our way to my parents' bedroom, the very spot where I was conceived. And my mom's first words were, "Oh God, the fights your father and I had in this room." Telling and sad. We rounded the corner into my parents' bathroom. Oh my God, the same blue fixtures, the same blue toilet, the blue sink, the blue tile, the same square plexiglass cabinet pulls with the beveled edges and the polished chrome centers. And then my mom cried out, "Oh my God, my mirror!" And she began to sob hard. My dad had built a wedge of plywood and mounted it on the wall opposite my mom's vanity mirror. And on the slanted side of the wedge, he affixed a mirror so my mom could stand in front of the vanity and see the back of her hair. How many times I've thought about that mirror over the years, she said, and wished I had it. And he built it for me. I asked him, and he built it for me. And it's still here. And he's not. In the span of a few moments, we went from recalling the most horrific arguments to a space of healing, of the deepest affection and gratitude for what was likely the full extent and limit and beauty, really, of my father's love, solving a concrete problem. That's what he could do. That's what he could offer. Not done with any great style or attention to detail, mind you. But it was sturdy. My mom has lost so much vision from macular degeneration, and she stood there in front of that mirror, trying to see the back of her head. And instead, she saw love and forgiveness. And I caught a glimpse of inherent worth and dignity. Some view in that mirror. Maybe what we do can be a window or a mirror into what was always inherent all along, but maybe what's required is our willingness to put on the gold coat before we look into that mirror and allow ourselves to feel human in all that that may mean, in darkness and in light. May we all gaze into that mirror and see that reflection of ourselves and each other as we are and as we are not, with kindness and with grace. So be it. And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Let us turn within and gently closing our eyes and taking some deep breaths just to be with the words of that message. Let us allow the wordless word to do its work within us as we take a moment just to be in silence and see what comes up. And right here and right now, I know that whatever has appeared for us, whatever has come forth, whatever, whether it be quiet or noisy, dark or light, that everything belongs and that everything is part of that fabric of inherent worth and dignity that Michael spoke of with such eloquence. And so we know that as part of existence, that we are also part of that seamless robe, that unbroken cloth, that spiral expanding upward of worth and dignity. And today, it's just enough to know that. To know it without having to prove it. To know it without having to compare our worth and dignity to somebody else's. To know it without having to judge it. Just knowing that I am is who I am, and that is enough. And so we celebrate together this knowing. We celebrate it and we hold it together. We hold it for the person sitting before us, beside us, behind us. We allow this sacred sanctuary to be exactly that, a sanctuary where we know the truth for one another, where we hold each other to this greater accountability of our worth and our dignity, to the greater knowing of it. And as we expand in our consciousness to do this for ourselves and for one another, we reach out beyond the walls of this center, and we bless the entire world with the spiritual work that we do here today. And so I am grateful, just so grateful for that, so grateful for this opportunity to pray and to heal and to hear and to know, so grateful for the ability to trust the wonder of God that is more wonderful than we can ever imagine. So grateful to be here in this sanctuary, held in the deepest love, love again beyond our imagination. I bless this spiritual center and every single person here today and those who are not here. I bless every path to God, this teaching and all others. I bless churches, synagogues, temples, mosques, ashrams. I bless atheists and fundamentalists, trusting that everyone is a blessing in their own unique, dark and light way. And so, I give thanks for this morning. I give thanks for God. And I release these words into the divine mystery as together we say, and so it is. I am.
Everyone has a melody, something you just have to sing, your soul song, your soul song. I love to hear your melody. It inspires me to sing my soul song, my soul song. And holy rhythm is a beautiful thing, our vibration resonating. Through the music we are healing, The elegance of life is what we're feeling now.